website. Great. Thank you, John. Welcome to this workshop, Share and Learn series, the last workshop we have for the 21-22 school year. I know that it's funny to say that in the middle of the year for teachers, but we're going to talk about the conference programming at the end of the conference of the workshop today. But before, we will talk about games to have in class to stimulate everyone's attention. I am Marie-Catherine Touin. I am a coordinator for the Global Citizenship Education Program at Spur, and I'm thrilled to have you with us tonight. Let's take a moment to acknowledge that we are all joining from different places in Canada and maybe eventually from elsewhere in the world. And I would like to mention that I am currently standing on unceded Abenaki territory in a city otherwise known as Sherbrooke. So please take a moment to write in the chat box where you're joining from so that we might have an idea of who's with us in the room. Next, I will quickly share what is Spur Change all about for those of you who don't know. So as you see on your screen, you should be seeing some slides. So for those of you who want to see the English slides, there should be different viewing options at the top of your screen, and you should be able to select English slides, but you should be able to see it in English.
So if ever you prefer to see the presentation in English, just click there and you will have English slide. So I will take just a few seconds to present. Donc, comme je l'ai dit aujourd'hui, c'est la dernière.
As I was saying earlier, it's the last workshop for a Share and Learn series for teachers across Canada. And we are going to talk about how when awareness rhymes with playfulness, and we're going to talk about how we can use games to raise awareness in our classroom about different issues. So it's going to be interesting. For those of you who don't know Spur Change, it is a 5-year initiative funded by Global Affairs Canada, and it's aiming to increase the engagement of Canadian SMOs in international development and increase the engagement of Canadians, particularly youth, as global citizens. So we're mainly aiming to raise awareness amongst youth, and that is where you come in the Share and Learn series. Share and Learn series wants to put together 3 activities yearly for teachers of primary levels, and we really want to share teaching resources and experiences with experts so that we may mobilize youth as global citizens that will be efficient in defending ODDs, the SDGs. So each of the regional councils, so today we have ECOSI. So today we will be talking amongst teachers and trainers about how to facilitate raising awareness with youth about global citizenship. Please keep your mic turned off unless you have a question or you're actively speaking. If you do have a question, please use the symbol at the bottom of your screen under the reactions icon. You will have the option to raise your hand. And if you want to pipe up, you could use this. So please use the chat box also to interact during the workshop. We will be asking some questions during the workshop, so don't hesitate to get involved. Today, our facilitating team is first of all Nancy Burrows, who is a host from ECOSI. Then we have Dominique Forget, who is officer at CSC as a facilitator, and she will be your main facilitator, and Yolande Bouchard, who is a retired teacher and facilitator. So it will be a great conversation between between the three. If you have questions after the presentation, you can contact Nancy directly if you have questions specifically tied to EcoC, or you can contact me myself directly if you have questions tied to Spur Change program. I will now stop here and ask Nancy to introduce herself. I did it briefly, but if you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself, that'd be great. Hi, everyone. I am Nancy Burrows. I am project coordinator in Global Citizenship Education at EcoC, which is the Quebec Association in Global Citizenship Education. So briefly, EcoC is a network of Quebecer organizations in global citizenship. And we are namely working towards defending human rights, women and girls' rights, and environment. So that's part of our strategic visions. And to launch today's conversation, we wanted to show you a small video that we came up with at EcoC. We have developed a definition together of what global citizenship is for us and our members. So in this video, you will see what our pillars are of global citizenship, what it aims to do, and what's its general role. And so I will ask Marie-Catherine to please launch the video. And as she was saying earlier, if you want to watch it in English, all you have to do is click viewing options and choose English slides. And you should be able to see it in English. So I will just wait a few seconds to let everybody take a moment to choose their preferred language. And if we're ready, I'm going to launch it.
Here at the Association québécoise des organismes de coopération internationale, ACOSI, we recognize that the world we live in is rife with economic, political, social, and environmental inequalities. Unequal power structures exist in our society, as well as between peoples and nations. We believe that we have a collective responsibility to make change in order to create a more just and equitable world. This is why ACOSI adopted a common definition of global citizenship education during its 2019 General Assembly. Global Citizenship Education, GCE, is a response to the urgent need for action on local and global issues. It is based on a recognition of the self-determination and interdependence of people and their interaction with all living beings, individual and collective commitments to the promotion of women's rights, human rights, and the environment, and the affirmation that we are all responsible for the world. GCE allows us to understand the structural causes of power dynamics that create injustice and inequality. A true call to action, GCE is a set of practices that promote solidarity, learning, awareness building, and concrete positive social transformation. It prioritizes an active and reciprocal approach with individuals and communities for the purpose of co-constructing soft skills and the power to act. Action in GCE is oriented around 5 major pillars. Awareness building, to inform the public of the many different elements involved in international solidarity. Training, to reinforce skills and understand power dynamics and inequality, both at a local level and internationally. Research, to enrich or develop new understandings in a spirit of collaboration with individuals and groups. Mobilizing, to bring people together in a collective movement that values community and learning through action. Advocacy, to put pressure on public and political processes and propose alternatives that increase our political impact. Working in partnership with other groups, international cooperation organizations create real change in the world. This is what GCE is all about. Workshops, conferences, activities in schools, marches, kiosks, mentoring, public events, popular education circles, public theater, action research, petitions, meetings with government representatives, and much more. Change happens because thousands of people get involved. For example, Elodie and other students organized with their friends and changed their school's curriculum to include international and environmental education. Manu participated in a Quebec Without Borders internship like thousands of young people before him. After his first-hand experience of international solidarity in Senegal, he decided to get involved with a group that supports people experiencing homelessness back home, allowing him to enact change at the local level. Marc-Arthur gathered signatures for petitions and participated in marches supporting a global campaign that successfully fought for debt relief for the poorest countries in the world. Aisha and other young people in her community created an anti-bullying application to teach high school students about inclusion. Following a variety of pressure tactics and awareness campaigns, David's organization succeeded in obtaining Fair Trade City status for their municipality. Following a conference by activists for women's rights, more and more Quebecers, like Rashida, can understand the injustices and impacts that Canadian mining companies have on women and Indigenous peoples. That's what GCE is all about. People organizing to create local change by developing bonds of solidarity and mutual aid. Each group and individual is free to adapt GCE to meet their needs. Through their engagement, their work-building awareness, organizing and advocating, and by sharing their experiences, participants become agents of change helping to build a more egalitarian, just, equitable, inclusive, sustainable, mutually supportive, and peaceful world. GCE is a global initiative that develops and reinforces the skills, abilities, and engagement of individuals and collectives alike. These three transformative pillars lead to personal changes in our lifestyle, actions, and behaviors, changes in our relationships with others and the planet, and systemic changes in our policies and our environmental and socio-economic structures. GCE helps reinforce the development of more just and equitable relationships built on reciprocity and interdependence between individuals and peoples. To really see what GCE is all about, we have to look at the work on the ground. Thanks to the tireless efforts of thousands of people involved with international solidarity and cooperation organizations, we get closer every day to a more just and egalitarian world where human rights are respected. GCE serves as a blueprint for action and as a common frame of reference within which we can work together towards a better world, here and everywhere. If you want to learn more, information about GCE is available on ACOSI's website in French, Spanish, and English at www.acosi.qc.ca/ECM.
Donc, ça donne un peu
So it kind of gives you a bit of a background vision of what global citizenship feels and looks like at ECOC. And a part of that GC is happening in the schools, and that's where we reach tonight's theme. At ECOC, we are very thrilled to be part of this event. So without further ado, I will introduce the two contact people that we have with us tonight. So welcome to Yolande Bouchard, who has a 34-year career in teaching history of Canada and contemporary world in Mont Notre-Dame College of Sherbrooke in Quebec. He has also received the General Governor's Award of Excellence for teaching in 2015. The second person we have is Dominique Forget. She is a facilitator in Global Citizenship program in Sherbrooke with the International Center for Immigration Solidarity. And she is focusing primarily on raising awareness amongst teens. So I'd like to pass it over to her, Dominique, for her to give us a bit more information about the CSI. Hi everyone, and hi to Yolande, who's in the office right next to me right now. I am working with the International Center for Immigration. It's a small global citizenship organization based in Sherbrooke. We have three main pillars. First, public engagement. So that's what we'll talk about mainly tonight. And we do a lot of these activities in the schools here in Estrie. We also have partners across the world with whom we've been collaborating for some of them for as long as 2 decades. So we have people in Peru, Haiti, Nicaragua, and some people in Senegal as well. And in parallel to this, we also have internships, so collaborations with our partnerships across the world to have collaborations, whether on the grounds or online, as is the case for now, with programs that are funded by provincial or federal ministers. So I am here to talk about our favorite workshop named Globopoly. But before going any further, I'd like to maybe do a small activity to break the ice today. So I will ask a question that's also going to be shared in the chat box for everyone to read. And we're going to take a small moment to let everyone write their answer. And then I'm going to count to 3 and you will be able to send enter and send your message and everybody will be able to read the messages. So the first question I'd like to throw at you today, and maybe like Yola can answer directly verbally, is as a teacher or as a facilitator in the schooling system, do you use play as a teaching tool? And if so, in what context? With what content um, do you use this technique? So I'm just going to let you take a few seconds to answer this question, and I'm going to let you know when you can send it in.
C'est bon, on va essayer.
Okay, so let's try that. 3, 2, 1, go. Maybe I didn't count long enough. So let's try it again. So if you're still writing or typing up, please go ahead and finish sending your message along. But for now, I'd like to hear from Yola. As a experienced trainer, do you see play as an important tool for teaching? Dominique, it's so essential. And I'm not sure if you'll recall, a few years back, I was teaching Canadian history. And students would come into the classroom with a certain energy. And after 15, 20, 30 minutes, they would start to lose their energy. And I would think, well, the content is supposed to get more interesting as the class goes along, but my students' attention would be continually going down. And so I suggested a way to make Canadian history more interesting. And one student rose her hand and said, well, just come up with a game. And so that grabbed my attention. And of course, all my students were young women. And what I said is, well, okay, I'm not going to come up with the game on my own. We're going to do it together. And we built a game with a whole classroom. So it was a quiz sort of game that was really adapted to our class. So it was kind of like a pop quiz game. And it was so successful, so much that every year I would go back to the game to review the contents. And so I realized, and maybe that's why Globopoly was so successful at home here in Sherbrooke, is that if you want your students to retain the information, you need two things. You can use two tools. You can first tell your students, this is going to be important, remember this information, or you can present the information as a game. Game and play can help your students learn without even realizing, and that's when we learn the most efficiently. That's when you connect the dots and think critically. And so I realized that quickly and use the game as much as possible. But be careful, we don't want to fall into a trap, because the game, it needs to be relevant and adapted to your public. If your game is too easy, you're losing your class. So you need a few minutes sometimes to make the game credible. But if it is accepted, if your class accepts your game, then you have such a great opportunity in front of you. Thank you, Yola. I see some teachers saying in the chat box that yes, they do use some games sometimes. We will talk about one game that we played in social classes, but it can still be used in all different contexts. And the idea tonight is to introduce a story of success with our game, Globopoly, but to also break it down in different ingredients. So we're going to try to go back and dive back into the game and see what were the main ingredients we used to make our game, Globopoly, such a great success and such a useful tool for global citizenship education that we're using here in our region to talk about international inequalities. So I want to start by taking maybe 10 minutes to tell you about Globopoly, because we're going to go back and use this game to highlight different ingredients that we use all along the workshop. So Globopoly is a game that was created from A to Z by our team here at CSC. And the main goal was to put up a workshop that we gave in several schools. And the goal of the workshop was to give an introduction to international inequality. So it was interesting. It gave okay results, but we thought it was quite boring to facilitate. And so the trigger point was to realize that it wasn't even fun as a facilitator to give it. And we are quite dynamic and enthusiastic facilitators. So we wanted to have fun. We started to think about a workshop, what were our principles, key principles that we wanted to communicate in that workshop. And we wanted to make it as interactive as possible. We wanted to get our class playing. And so we split our class up in 6 teams, each representing a character in 6 different countries of the world. So we have Canada, Japan, Syria, and 3 other countries with whom we have partnerships, Haiti, Mali, and Peru. And the goal of the game, and I'm going to show you in a minute visually what it looks like, but the game is spread across a 7-sided figure, and we need to go to the center. And so it's really helpful. All the students can just look at the map and realize that their goal is to go to the middle. And so quickly, the goal is really quickly understood, and we have grabbed the attention of our classroom quite quickly. But there's a twist. Right away, we ask, do you believe that everybody starts in the same place in life? And we can already bring on an early conversation about inequality, because right away, some students will raise their hand and say, no, it depends on whether you're a woman or a man, whether you live under a dictatorship or not, if you have access to education. And so we come up, actually, we use the knowledge that's already accessible in the classroom to highlight what are factors of inequalities in the world directly with the teachers. And then we do a privilege march. We give examples and statistics, and we see members of the classroom placing themselves differently in the game. And so the Japanese businessman who has no wife, no kids, starts on the step number 10 on 12, but the young woman who is a nanny in Haiti, doesn't have access to healthcare or education, is still at the starting step. And so right away, we can see that there are injustices, and it's not a surprise, students are expecting it. So we're using their existing feelings and experiences to see, yes, that there are injustices in the world. And then depending on where the students are starting from in the game, they have access to different actions that will have impacts elsewhere towards other characters. And it's interesting because students aren't necessarily aware of what impacts will survene during one game. And so at the end of the first round, Japan normally gets to the center alone and first. And at that point, they have to draw a card and it says, okay, you're alone at the center, but you won't be able to win alone. So everybody has to step back twice, 2 steps. And it's going to happen every time somebody reaches the center alone. And that's when we bring the new rule of the game, which is rather than get to the center on your own, the goal is to reduce inequalities between the different characters. And so the characters that are more privileged in the game and those who are less so. And so it gets people to think about their privileges, but also the impacts that their own actions can have across the whole game. And the more we go through the game, the more they can see the impact they have on others. It's normal because a Canadian player, for example, will be buying a cell phone, and then we're going to see the Mali character go back. And that's when we can really go into great conversations about numerous issues, extractivism, the fact that there are children doing forced labor in different countries. And we can talk about racism, feminism, fair trade, disinformation, ethical fashion. So many issues that are super complex and that we can still reach through the game and start going deeper into them. And it's interesting because we are identifying actions after each of the actions that are proposed in the game. And so I know I'm going fast, but it still gives you kind of an idea of what the game is about. And at the end, we always take a moment to go and debrief with the students. And usually, what comes out of that is I wasn't aware that what we're doing here would have such an impact elsewhere. And when we come to that realization, we put a checkpoint and we consider that we reached our goal in that class today.
interreliés et
and
c'est
how
dur pour les
global
jeunes
issues are
qui
so
sont dans les
interconnected.
cégeps, donc un petit peu plus vieux, d'avoir une
And
réussite
students
sur
who are
le
at
jeu
even
et
CEGEP level who are,
s'impliquer un petit peu
feel like
pour
they
essayer
have a
de
bit more of
résoudre les
control
problèmes. Donc,
over these issues, and they can start to move towards action. So then why does globopoli or globopoly work? So we have 5 key ingredients that we think could be interesting for everyone here. So when you want to develop your own games in your pedagogical approaches, you maybe it's not always clear what are the 5 ingredients that you use the first time, but these are different ways and different ingredients to include so your game can go further. Okay, so maybe you're not a teacher. I'm not a teacher. I'm a facilitator. I create workshops. And so it would be also great to hear from everyone here how you want to move this to the practical side. So here we're showing you a little bit of our game materials. So we're starting one ingredient by the time, and each ingredient will, you can ask you a question. So we can have a chance to actually have an exchange and reflect together tonight. So, according to you, in your opinion, do you think that it's really anchored in the needs of the environment, of the milieu? So, why did we base for this game in the school environment, right? We asked ourselves a question: what are the different needs and learnings that have to happen in the Quebec school system that we have to touch on this workshop? So what is it? So we have 2 things. We have to make sure it's pertinent, that is actually it answers needs that are needed in the education system. And also it has to be desirable to teachers so that they can have other people outside of the walls of the school to come in and help teach their students. So quickly we were able to target this need, right, throughout this game. So then we created the outline of this game, and we had it validated by the teachers. So we did different focus groups when we got started, and we got together different teachers from different levels, different schools, and we had the discussion. It was like, is this working for you? Is this interesting? Do you want to try to play this with the games? So then we really tried to put this and anchor this, root it in the needs of students and the teachers. So now I want to ask about, if you're doing this workshop with students, how do you make sure it's rooted in your pedagogical practices? Okay, thank you, Dominic. You were able to connect the with the game, and then what are our expectations of our students in a contemporary society. So what I want to go back to, Dominic, the first year that you shared this game with the students, I don't know if you remember, but I had an idea. Some teachers came over and saw, and it was the principal of the school and the directors of the schools came. And when you left, we were able to watch the reactions of the students. And we had to have a team discussion to be like, who will be like, who does this go towards this game? Who does this is used for? We saw it was rich in pedagogy, the activity, but who could be reached by this game? Because we have students that are 13 years old and others who are 17. And we wound up concluding that it was worked better and is more adaptable to the older students because there was an idea that we could change some mentalities. But there was professors around this table. It's like, no, 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 it's pertinent to us. Actually, on the first levels, it's like a bunch of different teachers saw it. It's like, for me in my English program, I'd like to do this. And I'm wanting to talk to everyone who is here with us tonight to also think about games. But also, when we say games, the first idea that comes to our head is usually we think about on a table, a kitchen table, and it's absolutely not that. You need a huge space to play this game. Dominic didn't underline this enough that you should have seen the whole spectacle that this took up. It was a huge platform on the ground. So just visually, when the students walk in and they see this game on the ground and the countries, and it's just exciting. And it's like, what is this? A game that it's this big, and this already it touches them and sparks interest, and the teaching team as well. So it really answers to the needs of the media that I was in. And so our older students, so like the end of their secondary studies, it seemed like it really responded to their educational programs, what the ministry wanted. But sadly, for those from Quebec, there's not a lot of space in the last year of high school to do more global awareness and consciousness raising. We're really focused on science, and that's outlined by the ministry. So it's sad because, but this game really helped us with our program. However, just to find the time to do it was a challenge, right? And for to give you more information, and it's like, that's true. We thought about it for high school students, but we have facilitated in all different years. In at Akosi with Nancy, we did it with their employee team and different members. We've done it women, mothers. So it's really adaptable with this game. And we have the base level that's really accessible for everyone, and it's very well vulgarized. And then we can take comments and adapt it. And it's what discussions you're going to have with the people that are actually in front of you playing the game. And it's really well articulated. And then we can add different layers to this game and to the complexity depending on who we're working with. So it's really was a win-win for us. So I don't want to really hit this over the head too much. I know already that as teachers, you're already rooted in the needs of your community or the needs of your school. So then we'll move to the next ingredient. So, which is to have a good dose or amount of reality. So it's be rooted in reality. So in globally, we see that the game, this is where we're playing the game at the Yola school. Oh, Yolan School, sorry. And we were doing some storytelling, giving some testimonials. We had different characters, and all the youth at the beginning had to share their character by saying I statements. It's like, my name is Marie-Ève Jean. So all the students presented their character, and then some of their characters are real people. And so after everyone reads their character card, some characters come from Haiti, Mali, Peru, we changed their names. However, their profile of the character, so we're talking about socioeconomic character, is an actual true person. And we do tell this to the students, and it's like, oh, it's true what we're doing here. This is a real person. And then the students get more invested and are more like concerned about what's going to happen in this game. And then we also talk about the privileged walkway. So let's say if you have access to healthcare, you're allowed to move 2 squares forward. And then very quickly, people's or students' emotions are hit, right, by this. So at the end, everyone gets to see how it's clear there's injustice and it's unfair. But as you see certain characters that are women that have to go back and other characters go forward, it's all these little elements these students are get to see this, what it happens in the world for real. There's some things that I'll have access to and some things that I won't. And this really brings the game rooted into reality. And then we go above statistics, right? I think this is really important in the practice that I've developed at talking about global citizenship education. I think statistics are really abstract. They're not, they're sometimes like it's interesting visually, there's a graphic, and that's important. But then if we're just limiting ourselves to numbers, and we lose the human face behind it. So then doing the walk of privileges, we're able to say like who's actually in positions of power that's a woman, and rather than giving a number, we can illustrate it throughout the game. So really to put the roots in individuals and experiences rather than numbers. And in terms of the reality and how realistic this is, and Yolande mentioned it before, we are talking about this is someone from the community who comes into the school to talk about an issue or a problem. We think it does have an impact on information retention and the impact of the activity. So I also wanted to ask you the question, talking about storytelling and to bring testimonials from people from your community, or people maybe just an extract of a like a video or a documentary or a story. Does storytelling and testimonials, are they part of your pedagogical practices, and do you think they have a stronger impact? So then I will once again give you about 30 seconds to write something down. So in the chat you can read the question, and then I will give you a chance to share your answers or maybe speak up, and Yolande will give his impression as well. Thank you.
Donc, on va y aller avec le 3, 2, 1.
Okay, I'm going to do 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Ah, Marie-Catherine, intéressant.
Okay, so I have something that's interesting from Marie-Catherine. It's more in outside of school context, more informal context. So I think, yeah, it's really important in schools, but I also know, for example, in Haiti, there's more oral traditions. So I think that these games and the message is shared more easily. So I think this kind of thing in international development projects would be very interesting. So look back over to you, Yolande, while we're waiting for people to answer in the chat. So you, storytelling, what do you think this with the credibility of this game? What is storytelling? How does this impact students who participate in the activity? So just to tell you, it had an impact right away during the game. Right away, they made it more important, or they gave it importance, knowing with the names, the characters, the questions, everything's coming from reality. And I just want to underline something that you kind of said. You didn't say, but me observing you, you have no idea the importance of your physical presence there. Just what it was unbelievable what you brought to these meetings, because the students were discovering things and you kept on bringing them further. So they're playing the game and they're learning things and they're discovering things and you're helping to enrich what they're discovering. And so you physically were like becoming a character who was also being able to give their testimony and like reveal a reality. So these are amazing things that can happen with this game or games. And so the whole process that was thought out and your active participation and presence in this game, the impact was huge. And you could see it so clearly because the students were so serious. They didn't get distracted. They were able to show up at the beginning of the game, sit in teams. They were maybe a little nervous at the beginning, little shy, and after a few minutes through this activity, you got them so involved. Everything was so credible, and this information, they were able to make huge discoveries. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is how it works. And youth need to be able to find solutions that they can bring, that they can make sense of, and then to nourish them with information. But however, we often don't give them the tools to change things. And this game gave them the chance to do that. So thank you for teachers who are here with us this evening. I just want to say there's so many opportunities, but we do it as an international cooperation organization and talk about these issues. But I'm sure in your schools or your medias, there's so many organizations that would want to have access to youth to be able to talk about these issues or sexual based violence or international solidarity or the environment. There's so many different issues and there's so many NGOs or nonprofits in your communities. Maybe you don't know them already and maybe they don't have the means to do publicity and to get known, but they might want to come and do these activities in your schools. Before preparing for the night, we were talking that how it's so important for schools to open up to the community. So we have these students, hundreds and hundreds of youth, and it would be so nice if the school can open its doors to talk about certain issues and problematics and to be able to bring in other people from the community who can support you in your teaching practices and bring in workshops that are different. But this is a complex game in this example, but it can happen in so many different forms. We can talk about just storytelling. So there's you can invite someone who can come speak of their reality. It can just be like a job fair, but just to let people who are more involved in a certain issue to speak in front of the youth and to engage them in a dialogue. It just really brings the reality forward and so many different horizons. So Dominique, I'd just like to add, we have way more networks around us than we believe. There's the parents, there's a community, and it should be an obligation over the school year. If we're obligated to look through all this pedagogical content, it should also be like, what is the pedagogical support? Let's bring in people from our community into the schools. If the school has to open up for everyone who lives around it. I don't know. I'd be really interested or curious to know if people here, if you invite people from the community into your classrooms, please don't hesitate to add something to the chat. We still have quite a bit of time in front of us. So we really want this to be as interactive as possible, Zoom being Zoom and all. But we would really love to hear from you all what you think. So we're just talking about the playful aspect, offering a fun environment. This is the third ingredient. So what are the elements of a game that makes it interesting and fun? So that was the first part of the question that we had at the end. We want to get out of just a theory. We want to break it up bigger than just a workshop, and we want to make it as fun as possible. It's clear that it will be stimulating and stimulate interest And I know people who brought it up already. You do it in English classes already, do games. And for students to get pique their interest, it has to be motivating. And the students have to be in a certain level of control of what's happening to keep their interest. And the game really gives us the opportunity to do both, because interest is easy because it's like we're getting out of the typical schoolroom and the materials is fun. But then the control level is to be able, they get to make decisions. They get to reflect with their peers about what are the better choices that can be made to move the game forward. So this makes it very fun for students. And you're able to touch on very different issues in a very, let's say, informal context. And Yolande, I wanted to ask you, let's say there's so many issues that are brought up in this game, Globopoly, and there are super complex issues. So we can talk about sexual and gender-based violence. We talk about migration and this conflict in Syria and so many things. So then how does the game be able to bring up these issues of in a different way when we're in the class with the game rather than typical ways? So game opens the door to, doesn't matter what theme, any subject, and it helps us drop the stereotypes and the taboos. Let's say I showed up in class and I said, today we're going to talk about inequalities across the world. Students will be like, yeah, we know. But, well, yeah, they know, but they don't know. That's the thing, right? So our classes are created to bring the content, but we rarely have solutions to offer. And with the Globopoly game, we're in the fun times, the play times, but the themes are still serious. And it's a game, even if it's fun, it's still very serious, because the solutions that we can offer are actual solutions. The solutions that are presented are real situations and real solutions. So maybe people in different classrooms that you haven't, maybe people haven't noticed, one element that I really learned or was became aware with because of this game, realizing that our public or our clientele is more and more international. In my classroom, I saw the difference over the 34 years, the origin or where my students were from, how it changed. Cultures are transforming. And the objective of Quebec schools is to create Quebec citizens or Canadian citizens. Rarely did I ever see students in the day to day talk about their past, their culture, their viewpoint. Sometimes they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm from Syria or I'm Afghani, but that's it. This game opened the discussion afterwards when we finished the game. And we were back in the classroom and we had a time to discuss and share. They were able to say, well, what we just played, that was my life. I've survived this. I am from Haiti. I saw the consequences of this. I am Syrian. My family survived, went through this. And so even if they're from countries that weren't in the game, they was still the same reality. So it was able to drop walls. To this game allowed certain themes to be brought up, and then certain students will able to say, yes, I can confirm this. I can now talk about where I'm from and my experience. And these were often moments that hit hard, that touched me a lot, to see students who were able to take time and give their little testimonial of their life and to and to be able to bring their own lives and heart into this game. It's very touching because often these are, well, mostly these are students that I don't know. So the fact that they feel that they're safe enough in a trusting environment in front of their peers that they can share this. So it's like, oh my gosh, this game helps create spaces for dialogue. And it's so interesting to create and offer this space to students throughout this game. And I've facilitated this so many times, and there's been so many experiences like this in one school in Sherbrooke, and we weren't able to finish the game because we weren't able to do enough go rounds. We weren't able to like reduce the inequalities. However, there was so much discussion between the youth during the workshop, and it's like, ah, that's not okay, that's so upsetting. And then it's like, so we couldn't play the game, but what we were able to still do, we were able to share things that we would have never shared between each other before. So that is, I felt so privileged to be able to see that happen. And so if that can just plant some seeds to give youth a chance to feel better, to share their stories, to talk about their history, it helps make prejudices go away, right? And create dialogues. What I also wanted to say, we were facilitating this one in a social work technical program in Grand Bay. And so obviously mutual aid and um, aid work is all at the heart of this program. And they were saying, as a social worker doing this, and as a teacher, they were saying it was so much fun to imagine this game. And it's like, as a future social worker, I would love to be able to use this eventually in my practice. So this game was interesting for them, but also for future facilitators to use a game like this to help bring up dialogues and encourage discussions. So it's such a joy for the student, as much for the students as for the people who facilitate this game. So then I see Nancy wrote something. So what I understand in
Oui,
making
c'est
things less personal, gives space for people to share what they've lived. And yeah, so let's say we created stereotypes for the needs of the game. We created there's three main characters that are, or three characters that are true, but then we have a student teacher and a businessman from Japan and an engineer, I think from Liban. So yes, there's stereotypes, and it's for sure the not every Japanese person is a rich businessman, and it's not like all Canadians are like this one teacher from Quaxicuk. There are certain stereotypes that we use, but we using these different models to create the characters so we can bring up different issues through these characters, and it does make connections with people's lives. And maybe I didn't see it before you brought it up, but I totally agree with what your comment was, Nancy. Oh, and Dominique, I just wanted to add that I feel that this game, there was also a strength. It can be such a good way to start a teaching module, right? For a teacher. So we we play at a game to discover inequalities and then discover solutions to see how we can lo- try to lower these decrease these inequalities. This could also be really good at the end of one of your teaching modules. So if you want to even go further than what you had gone, you can bring it back to people who could then come and give testimonials later. It is a tool that has such a huge quality that it really opens to our chances to reflect and pushes us towards action. And that is very rare. I just think we see have a hand up. Is it Mary Catherine or is it? Sorry, yeah, I just did raise my hand because so I was talking about how it's a fun environment, right? But even though we're talking about very serious issues, has it ever come up that the fun aspect creates problems and then makes it so you can't have the deeper discussions. Is it a like double-edged sword ever? I think Yolande, in your situations, it never happened. No, 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 never, never, never. But however, I do know in other schools, sometimes you have to have the youth a little under a tighter rope or a shorter cord. But it depends. You have to know your students, right? You have to know who are you reaching to. So this game is good for a group of students, and it'd be too bad if you're public. But if it's true, if you don't have the right clientele or the right public, you will maybe have a lot of management to do, like you have management to do in the classroom. But it is a good question, Marie Kathleen. I had one experience rather recently that is like pops into my head where I actually had to do okay, you guys, it's time to play. Let's go. And it's like the students were maybe reproducing,
Fois
like
raciste
there
ou
were some racist comments and they were like in it, and then we have to like take a break. But yes, we're playing a game, but we can't allow this to happen. So we have to do awareness raising in another way. And sometimes if they have a lot of freedom to act, yes, sometimes they can create have issues in bring up issues in behavior, and they just want to play. However, this doesn't happen very often. And so the teachers are always still around. And so their job is also to be like, hey guys, we're getting back centered and we get focused. But for facilitators as well, it's really clear that it gives a good chance to keep authentic. And sometimes why do students like lose attention? Sometimes it's just to play, but then other times because there's like some racist comments and we really have to go back together and get the group recentered. and and then, oh no, thank you, that was worth it because you got to it finally, it didn't come from me, and they heard someone else phrase it in a different way, why this is important. So I think but happily this rarely happens.
ingrédient
So
qui
let's
est
go to the next ingredient, which is uh, putting the accent on collaboration and co-construction. So we see all the different steps here and the different ways to get to the center. So there's a lot of content here. You know, students have to move around, move their characters. It even happened that some students said, okay, I'm the one who's doing the character. And then they would physically move across the map, which allows them to kind of move around and be a bit more stimulated. Collaboration seemed to be an essential component when we created this game because it needs um, actionable skills that have to be developed to become an involved citizen in our own community or in the world. So it's all about dialogue, debate, compromise, co-constructing, how to think of others and not just ourselves. And so the fact that the game needs these skills to be put into action, it allows us to bring the students smoothly into this critical environment so that they may keep building on what are the good actions to take as citizens in such and such context. And so, I'm talking the right way, but I'm really going to use air quotes on those because what we really want is to think about the impacts of our actions and to be aware of those impacts. But we can go into that a bit more later. But collaboration and action, it's true that for some students, it always happens at school. They have a hard time finding a team. Some kids can be kind of left behind, and it's things that we unfortunately always have to see in a schooling context. But in this context, as a facilitator, we are also able to give different roles in the team. For example, some team members may be responsible for keeping some kind of information, tracking other statistics. And so we are trying to distribute strengths and weaknesses um, fairly amongst teams so that every student has a chance to be useful. For example, someone who's stressed or maybe anxious won't necessarily have to speak in front of their other teammates or in front of a public. We could say something like, oh, if you're comfortable, you can read it out in front of your team. If you're not comfortable, don't hesitate to give the task over to a teammate. And so we always make sure that students feel comfortable in their experience. Sometimes there are some challenges tied to that. Sometimes some groups might be a bit less participating, or other teams will be very eager, while others are kind of like sitting down and not really getting involved. And generally speaking, the fact that it's a cooperative game and it demands that all team members work together in collaboration, it kind of rebalances these dynamics. So Yola, collaboration and handling the content. You were talking about the content itself earlier, how to create engagement. There's also the fact that teams have to collaborate together in amongst each other. And so for you, how did it help you approach issues around solidarity and global citizenship education? How did this aspect of our Globopoly recipe, how was it useful to help students get there? Well, I would say that oftentimes I was shocked because students who did have an interest for these themes of worldly inequalities, how to act as a citizen, how to change the world, how to make it more accessible, more inclusive, more peaceful, I knew they would get into the game. But what would usually surprise me is even those who were the least attracted by these kinds of themes would still get on board because it was a participating game. You couldn't just sit at the back of the class and be in a 4-member team and be 4 people who weren't participating. We're all just sitting around the table and something needs to happen. And so it was a very useful game to facilitate this collaboration and bring teams to have debates and discussions between them. There's the team itself that has to speak up, but in between the teams, we were also trying to find collective solutions to our issues. So funny enough, I feel that if it had been a game where each of the students had a little chore to do individually, we wouldn't have had that much success. But in this context, the pedagogical approach that we took really involves everyone in their team and across teams as well. Earlier, when I was saying, when I was explaining the game a little bit, it is a collaborative game, so everybody wins, everybody loses. It's sort of like a collaborative board game. It's the same approach, the same dynamic. And what we've been noticing is that when some of the team players are representing countries of the global north, they usually have a lot more impact than those characters coming from the global south. And that causes conflict, which is normal. It's the goal. We want to get the conversation started around these issues because sometimes for example, the player playing for Japan knows that their actions will be negative, but they don't have a choice but to go ahead with the program. And so sometimes, other teammates will be like, oh, why did you have to do that? And then, oh, I know I didn't have a chance. I'm sorry. And so, they get really invested, and there is some kind of a common understanding of the game that grows, and other teammates also get a chance to see what constraints are orienting other teammates' games or moves. And so there is inherent conflict in the game that can help us go to the crux of the issues and dive into conversation around potential solutions or whatever. And so that's what I wanted to add. Yes. And Dominique, that I don't know if you can recall, but every time you would go to class at the end of the game, you would say, we have reached a level of sharing that was almost fair, and everybody would clap that in their collaboration, they were successful. And that's what youth is all about too. You give it tools to act, and then they would forget that for an hour and a half, they were changing the world. You're giving them tools to change the world completely. And that really made them proud. They were proud of themselves, and it could show because when they would go back to class, some students would talk and they had maybe never spoken to each other before, but because they had to collaborate and find solutions to planetary issues, they would keep talking about the game and then maybe get closer. Yes, that's the part that I was less um, given the occasion to see, but I know it's true. Yes, so this kind of activity is very useful in so many ways. It really brings us to the fifth ingredient that I wanted to tell you about tonight, which are concrete solution ideas. So the issues that are being undertaken in the game, no matter what you're talking about in class, when it's a complex issue, bringing teenagers to talk about things that they don't necessarily understand well, it can be very quickly anxiety inducing. We can talk about all the climate issues right now that are generating a lot of stress for many youths across Quebec and Canada in general. And so it was very important for us to not leave the youth in this feeling of anxiety and anguish about things that really are much greater than them. And so we wanted to give them ideas of solutions. So concrete steps that they can take from now directly to be a positive actor of change in their community, whether on a small to a larger scale. Because we often tell them just getting reliable information, that's a huge step. You're not changing the world, but you're already informing yourself, which is a huge change that you can do every day. And if that's what you can do right now, then all the best to you. It's a lot to do already. Sometimes we talk about ethics, ethical fashion or fast fashion, trying to make sure that the working conditions of those people who will provide us with our material are more acceptable. But sometimes some people would say, well, okay, well, maybe the t-shirt that I'll buy that's made in Quebec or Canada, it's too expensive. Well, it's true. I don't buy only ethical clothing. Sometimes it's not accessible. Sometimes I can't afford it. And there's a bunch of reasons behind that. But there is the option to go buy secondhand clothes. And so there's also this idea of choice, because if you see some choice one day, for example, the student will want to be gaining money and wants to invest their money in somewhere. And so that brings us to talk about how some investments can be used by banks or companies to promote petroleum deals or other armed conflicts around the world. And so we can talk about personal acts or action that can really bring concrete change in their personal outlook on the world, but there are also very tangible things that they can do, like, for example, buying fair trade bananas when you go to the groceries with your parents. And so we try to take every single aspect and suggest one concrete action that we can do as a youth in Quebec and Canada in 2022, that you can do that will bring good around you, that you can talk about to people around you, so that other people may take the same path as you do towards change. And I think that's the best strength of the game. But generally speaking, I think when we go into a complex issue, it's very important to give a power of action to the youth through that, so that they can root in their realities, they can root it in their realities, and then get engaged in their realities in their school environment, in their community, etc. So as you were saying, kids would talk about it after. What did you see? What solutions would you hear coming from the youth, where you would see what they were doing, what they were inspired to do? What out of these ingredients did you feel was the most relevant? Well, first and foremost, Being 16 or 17 today, we're slowly coming out of a very difficult period with the sanitary situation. So students have been waiting for weeks that one of the biggest countries in the world that have veto right might attack another in an illegal way. And all of our youth, what they're hearing right now, it's always about how the environment has gone over the critical threshold. It's very triggering. They are constantly triggered in the information they're getting about the world. And when the Center for Immigration Solidarity goes into their school and they bring solutions that are attainable, that is such a wealth. You don't come with a spectacular outlook on life. You're just talking about reality and you're like, here's what you can do. What I saw very oftentimes is that many of my students would tell me, Yolande, we're never going to change the world, but we can change ourselves. We can change our perspective. And we are at an age where we'll be voting soon. That's an action we can do. And so if I'm at an age where I can vote, I can probably start taking conscious political choices. If I want to go towards that more peaceful, more fair world, I also have to get invested in it. And so there are some students that would have impacts on projects that they would do later in sciences. Sometimes they would come and tell me, after the experience we have with Dominique, well, I had a science project and I decided to get involved in something. They were going towards solutions that were positive because we would nurture it. Oftentimes, we nurture the negativity with our kids, and so it makes such a great difference when we arrive with solutions and with potential actions that they can do. And so sometimes the impact doesn't happen right away. You don't see it. It'll happen 6 months or 2 years later. But if you didn't take that approach of a playful way to think critically, then maybe they never would have had that B-click. Yes, I think in what you're saying also applies when you show documentaries in your class. Me, I have watched so many documentaries that just really made me want to cry because it doesn't give me any tools, any concrete ways to react. And so that's important too. We're talking about a game here, but especially, if you're showing a documentary or if you're presenting content, it's important to take a time to debrief and to go back to what was spoken about, how we felt about it, and what can we do with this now, so that we don't let any student in that stressed out state where they're contending with difficult issues, world issues. And so if we can go and invest the personal story of the students, it can be tricky, if we have a student that's been a refugee, if we don't tell this class that they can get involved in such and such organization, they can go and be a volunteer to integrate new students. You can also keep yourself from doing any racist comments. You can also tell your parents when they do make racist comments to please keep it to themselves. And so there are so many opportunities for this youth to be vulnerable, to be touched, and to see that they can be allies around these issues around them in their own communities. Yes, the prejudice. Let's talk about Haiti. There's this common discourse that Haiti will never get out of trouble because they're not able to take their own destiny into their own hands. And we realize through the game that they can't take realities, they can't take anything into their own hands because we are the one deciding. We decide the price of food, we decide what's good for them. We don't ask poor countries what they need. And that's when students start to understand that the problem would also come from our side. That is very strong. That's powerful. That's what you were bringing in the class through play and through conversation. So these prejudice that, you know, you us as white or richer countries were successful because we were just more responsible or capable of facing obstacles more efficiently. But when we think about it, it's not the case. Yes, and through time, our game also evolved. I think in global citizenship education and organizations, we are becoming more and more aware about anti-colonial struggles. And I think in the first years that I was using this issue in our game, I think it was a bit more murky. It was a bit harder to approach. And now we see that we have easier definitions, and the awareness is being slowly uh, more shared and more understood. And unfortunately, we have so many situations happening right now in Haiti, and we can use those to make sure that our students understand that there are so many colonial dynamics going on in this, and it's not a question of individual or even collective capacity to act. And so it's a matter of giving understanding tools so that we can understand in a positive light what really is going on, um, and to think critically about the world around them. I would like to hear whether anybody has any questions. I also wanted to see if anybody has similar experiences. We're talking about, you know, a complex game that has a lot of, you know, different aspects to it, but we can use many of those ingredients in much simpler or easier contexts. So I'd like to hear you on all of this. Nancy, maybe you'd like to start us off? Yes, I have a question about one of the things I thought was interesting in this game is the question of privileges. So you do talk about privilege, but not in a way that personalizes it, puts the individual on the spot, and where, you know, you're physically placing yourself in a room, okay, like two steps behind if you're a woman or three ahead if you're a heterosexual and things like that. And sometimes it can really um get people to act defensively or go into a personal space, and sometimes that's not always the easiest to facilitate. And what I understand and what is interesting in what you're saying is we're doing the privilege march but with fictional characters that are not ourselves. And I was wondering, are there any identification going on? Do students identify themselves to the characters, or I see, Dominic, that you were giving the example of the Japanese character that used to say, "Oh, you know, I'm sorry, I'm doing this move, but I don't have a choice." And are there any similar reaction in between characters and with the players? Yes, oftentimes when we talk about the countries and we let the students choose their countries, some of them will go right away towards a country that they're interested in for a reason that I'm not sure about. So, you know, some student will be interested in Peru maybe because they had an internship there, but there's something interesting because Japan isn't a country where Canadian students have a tendency to interact with. And so we tell the students, okay, you have to really think as Mr. Namaki from Japan, and you have to think like he would. And there are some teams that are very comfortable with that, and they can take it on right away, and they, you know, they go into this ruthless businessman character. But other people are so uncomfortable, and they repeatedly apologize. And but so where some students will take the role very easily and defend it easily, then it'll intimidate others in different ways. A few years back, I remember one of the students was saying, "Oh no, I don't want to be this character. I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be a businessman." And we were like, "Okay, well, you're still gonna have to do it. You know, it's happening anyway in the world, whether you do it or not." And it's funny to see the dynamics around that because there is a bit of personification that is happening, and some students will do it in a very serious way, while others will feel bad for actions that they're taking while in their character, for, you know, a bit more irresponsible actions that they would take as while being in their character. And so if we go back to the case of Haiti, because we've been talking about it, the team that had Haiti oftentimes can't move for the first 2 or 3 rounds of the game, and so we were trying to wonder, okay, is this boring? Yes, it is, but it's also necessary for raising awareness. And so we would go and be like, okay, the people with Haiti, what's going on? They'd be like, we can't move, help us. Okay, everybody, can you hear? Haiti can't move. They need help. They need someone to take a decision. They're stuck. They need to get ahead so that they may also get active and start acting in the game. And so we also try not to fall into the trap of stereotypes. So we always have to, explain. So Ariette from Haiti in the game isn't actually supposed to represent the medium Haiti person. And so it is still essential because there is a bit of appropriation. Students will appropriate their characters and it'll help them project themselves into the game. Marie-Catherine was asking in the chat box, I'm not sure if she was wondering whether there were rules given out at the beginning of the game to create a safer space, especially considering that the nature of this game. So do you have ideas or examples maybe of classroom facilitation that were starting out with some kind of housekeeping rules so that to make sure everybody felt safe? Well, with Globopoly, we didn't really feel the need to go into that. Um, that being said, when we go into groups with whom we don't have many contact, we try to still take a moment to see what's the group's general vibe, was their general approach towards this kind of issues. And sometimes we would take, if we are working with a class where there's a lot of reactivity, or maybe students are less familiar with the content, then we would warn ahead of time and try to make sure that they were prepared before the game. Yes, so we would explain ahead of time. I would say, okay, we're gonna have a visit. Dominic is gonna come, and a lot of people already knew you because they were aware of the game already. But so we would give some very basic ground rules, but it was never really necessary to insist. And as soon as you would show up into the classroom, you would tell them, okay, here's how we're gonna proceed, and it was getting started very it was happening very efficiently. The important thing was to not waste any time, and you weren't wasting any, so it was efficient. Yes, there are different ways to go into different issues, and it's different depending on who you're speaking to. So that's a warning we would give to the facilitators we would hire, because we do have some staff that helps us. And so, for example, when you're in a very multicultural group, we don't trigger warn the class, but we do prepare the facilitators to better react if there are inappropriate comments that come out, or if there are maybe more personal triggering subjects that come up. But no, usually there's not like a starting warning like you would do on a TV show. It does happen during the game, but it happens in a very human, very soft way. I was never uh put before a situation that got more risky. Yes, because you were saying that it would bring maybe more students to share about their lived experiences. So how is that safer space created? Maybe it happens naturally because of the nature of the game, but in so many contexts it can lead to a certain tension in oneself when we're talking about issues that that are tied directly to our lived lives. Yes, it's true that when we do activities like this, we can't just be like, okay, bye, Dominic, it's done, and everybody can just leave the class and we don't talk about it again. We have to debrief. And so the following period is just as important, maybe more than the activity itself. That's the moment where we really grasp the meaning of the activities. What have we learned? during the game, through playing, but also what caught your attention, what really grabbed you when you able to see inequalities, how they are born, how they are being fueled. What was your reaction? How did you react to this information? And that's when it really happens. How many times did I hear my students tell me, my parents are here in Canada because um, they weren't able to put up with this, what we just signed the game. They wanted to go into countries where so they wanted to go on into the country of oppressors rather than live in oppressed countries. And of course, when you're in classrooms where 1/3 of your students don't come from um, the local country, then that's a whole lot of differences that we have to handle. So sometimes we have kids coming from refugee families, or they could come from an immigrant family that's very elite. And so it's a huge sharing of experience, and you have to be very solid in your shoes as a student, sorry, as a teacher, as a facilitator, to canalize that and to orient that. And so introducing the classroom to such a great conversation can also lead to a more stressful or emotionally packed reaction. Okay, so if I understand Yolanda, so we're talking about Global Poly, but it could be any other game. So what the ingredient we're talking about now is, how can we find tools to teach about important subjects such as social inequalities? And what I understand from what you're saying is, the main idea was to have CSC come into the classroom, have a game of Globopoly, and when you see the same group the next time around, then you choose to have like a half hour, or maybe no, I take the whole class to debrief. It's 75 minutes, and oftentimes we would so I was using Lupoli as a triggering point, because the next following class, well, we had lived something together, and now let's share about it. And then we would go back to see what solutions we could identify together. Amongst the largest organizations, what are the solutions we find are the most rational or most interesting towards these issues? So it helped us to see that it's not only men or women building a world of hatred and violence. There's also so many people that are working for a more inclusive, a more just, humane society, and that's also what we have to remember. There is a goal in this game of Global Poly, is to identify what solutions we already do have in our hands. There's many others too, but if you want an ideal society, if you want heaven on earth, then change your own attitudes. Open up, open your heart and your mind, your souls. You have around you the whole world in in the palm of your hand. It's time to talk about it, and it's time to see together. It was amazing. It was so heartwarming, and it was so different from a traditional class.
Tu peux-tu faire du pouce là-dessus? Dans le fond, c'est dans les
Can I
ingrédients.
continue on that? The ingredients that you named, and that you're talking about playfulness, fun, collaboration, and all these actual solutions. Be one of my first things, what the most concrete steps that we couldn't screw up or not, you can't miss this step, is when we're in these activities that help us open our eyes, that help us see things that we haven't seen before, that have different parts of our discourse. We're not talking about totally absurd things. It's like these, but how are these things don't happen necessarily in the schoolyard, and but these things can bring us towards feeling a lack of power or like paralyzed, right? Because it's too big for me. I can't touch this. So that's what's so important in our educational activities is to not leave people with this feeling of disempowerment or no power, because sometimes we can have the opposite desire effect and leave people feeling it's too big to change. One person I was speaking with at one point, we were doing a workshops on women's rights and inequalities between men and women, or boys and girls, and sometimes we miss our mark and people feel really disempowered and demobilized,
dire comment
and so guys got mobilized and saying like, "Oh, I'm a victim of discrimination." Little boys were saying this, and like that's not
mais
okay.
des
And
fois,
then girls were feeling down too. So sometimes they can have this the undesired effect if we don't put special importance on possibilities, positive, that we do have a chance to change the world, and that there are little actions and examples of actions, like say, just to like at least buy local and ethical. But so you have to believe that the activity, oh, just a second, I'll start again. Okay. So let's just day 8, it's Friday. The students are kind of like distracted, and I invite Dominic to come, and I'm taking a vacation. I don't do nothing. And if you do that, then you're failing pedagogically speaking. If you invite the CSC to come into your class, there's a before, during, and after point, and that before, during, and after has to take up thought, and
les
it's
ingrédients,
important. And we're talking about ingredients, and it makes
recettes
me
ou
think
quand on fait
about our recipe, and it's kind of when you paint too. So let's say when you make your recipe, you have to plan beforehand, and you also have to do the dishes
faut laver
afterwards. So it's like if you paint the wall, you always have to wash the paintbrushes at the end, and maybe we forget that step, and maybe we don't like it that much at the end, but that's part of the process. And yeah, I like that image that you shared, Nancy. And so what the CSC shared in my class was a yeast for the bread. That's what I saw. So I had ingredients, right? I knew themes, but it wouldn't have raised as much. So because I needed a good yeast, and this this yeast came from the community sector. It came from our community organizations, who brought us back to get focused, to remind us what are our big values, why are we on this earth, why do we live on this earth, and then it went that far in our discussions to really ask those questions, to be like, oh, so are we're here, we exist on this world to help each other, to mutually aid each other. We don't know if there's an after world, so let's say right now, can we offer each other a little paradise right now? And it would be nice if everyone can benefit from what we have together. And I think those are very nice words that you said, to speak about this yeast, this thing, to create it, to make it grow bigger. And I saw a message that I said, and just a message to everyone says like, I want Globopoly to be accessible to everyone. And so I hear that. I know it's not available right now, but I feel the pressure. I think I want to figure out solutions. And okay, so that's always an issue when we talk about Globopoly. It's like, what's the possibility of exporting this? And we are not in a really capitalist mentality, so we have a little bit of a difficulty in our exporting of this. So, but maybe after COVID, we'll be able to figure out, like, we're looking about how doing it online, going into classes, and talking about it with students and teachers. So then, so we wanna live it. We wanna be able to do it without the CSI. And so there's lots of issues that are linked to our mission and our actual projects because so maybe then it's hard for other people to facilitate the game. It's harder to transport or to bring into another thing. But so maybe there's another organization, or we could take a project that's more neutral than CSI or CSC, and so to figure out a way that teachers could facilitate it in their networks. And it was 2-year project to create this game. So it's hard to just change, but I hear your messages from teachers, and we'd like to make it more available at a larger scale eventually. However, today you will not leave empty handed. We do have other workshops from the CSC that are kind of created with a similar ingredients, but are maybe a little bit less complex. Um, and are ready to go, ready to facilitate. So we want to share you these workshops that are 100% like ready to go after the workshop tonight. So, so there's a equitable commerce or fair trade workshop that you can, and I think Marie-Catherine will share it with you, the toolbox for this workshop. And I want to give you a little overview of what it is about. So fair trade, for what people who know a little bit less about it, it's basically a sort of system of certification, mostly of food stuffs, but there's also cosmetic products and clothing that fall into this. And the fair trade label basically ensures that there's fair and equitable working conditions and pay. And usually it's from the global south because they're products that we import. So there's no fair trade certification in Quebec because usually things that are made in Quebec have usually fair and decent working conditions. But I can also make a comment on migrant or immigrant workers. We know in agriculture that is not fair trade at all, and that's not involved in Canada. But we can bring the discussion up with students about responsible consumerism. So to talk about, it's still like it uses similar themes. You make teams, it brings up emotions. You can do concrete actions and the solutions, and you can do 10 students or like 70 students together. So we did a good job in detailing the workshop, and I gave you lots of information here. So it gives you the chance, if you want to have access to a workshop that's just ready to go in your classrooms, it's accessible. And then also, everyone doesn't have with ECOC and different provincial organizations and federations probably have different tools as well. And I'm not too sure, Nancy, maybe you can share it in the chat. On our interactive news, we have colleagues in Trois-Rivières in Quebec who share pedagogical tools on different themes, on for different scholastic levels. And so then there's can help you inspire different activities that you can organize in your classes. So thank you so much for sharing or this time so I could share these workshops with you. And I hope some of you will be able to facilitate these. And please, if you ever actually facilitate them, please write me. Okay, I'm just writing the email in the chat to make sure. Oh no, it's a website, interactive.com. And that if you want the video from ACOC that we saw at the end, the documentation from ACOC, all of this will be put in our resource library, and I will send you tomorrow an email so you have access to this, including the recording of our workshop right now, because I understand some of you had to leave a little early because sometimes there's some people from the Alberta, Manitoba, or the West, it's still time to be teaching. So you weren't able to stay for the whole thing. So we recorded it. So for you who want to watch it again or finish it, it's recording. So I don't want to cut our conversation short here. But I just wanted, since you were talking about the other things, I wanted to give you a chance to promote it. And is there any other things people can access or buy that you wanted to share at the moment?
Ben, en fait, je pense l'idée générale, je crois que
What I feel the general idea to share tonight is like, yes, we have this game Globopoly and we made this, but it's just to share these ingredients with you to inspire that certain themes, certain problematic issues that you might have a chance of. There's different creative ways to address them, and then try to invent games maybe with your students or with other people that can be inspired from this ingredient list. It's not scientific, it's just putting into practice and trying these out that we were able to figure this out. And so that's that this is how these came up. And we have other examples of other workshops that are easier to organize and to facilitate, but they all use these same 5 ingredients. So just wanted to say how games and playing can really help with global citizenship education and have strong results. I have a question from a teacher who would like to ask a question. So if it's okay for you, Leah, it's over to you. Yeah, you can write it in the chat, but please, or just turn on your mic. Yes, hello. Did you hear me? Yes, hello. I was just wondering. I find this really interesting as a game. I would really like to have access. I'm not a teacher, but I work at Cible in Bas-Saint-Laurent region. And what I was wondering, I think it's interesting that participants can live these inequalities through their character. And so in a high school level, do you think there's, and it works, I see that at the high school level, but do you think there's a minimum age group that we can do to like, let's say this kid who's 6 years old, maybe he'll cry if it's a game, it's just a game. I was just wondering on like, what age group do you think it can work to, how young? So what I would say, depending really how the game is played, the literacy levels will more have the issue because there's a lot of things to read. There's a little bit of a guide. And I feel I did it with the first years of high school, secondaire. It's not because they didn't understand and the emotions that came up, it was because of the reading that made it a little bit more complicated for them. But I think we can adapt it. We can adapt the content because the outline would be accessible for younger students if there was less reading to do. It's really what's interesting is but it might be more challenging to figure out on like the action oriented thing because maybe they have less really choices on how they act. So I really feel it's like up anywhere from 15 up, I feel it's easier. Younger, it's really how the game is structured, the mechanisms that makes it a little bit more complicated, and we lose a lot of time to reading. For younger kids, it's harder. But in terms of emotions, it hasn't been an issue too much about like the understanding that some people have privileges and others don't. No, for us, I've done it with youth like 6th grade, and that wasn't an issue really, but we took time to vulgarize, make it very accessible and understandable. So the game took much longer than the typical 75-minute class that we would do in high school.
Je me dis, c'est une version comme marche des privilèges.
So I think it's like the privilege walk or the privilege like steps. And that's like something that's a little bit more linear. There's a little bit less like moving around, but that could be something that's done by younger people and brings up for younger kids and brings up discussions. Are there more questions? I think that's
Merci. Donc,
okay.
je vais faire l'avant-dernier
I
mot.
think I'm gonna do the just the last of the almost last word at the end. I'm gonna leave it to Marie-Catherine at the end. I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone's participation. Thank you for coming, Dominique and Yolande. It was so inspiring and so interesting, and it helped to see how we can do creative, fun activities that can help make accessible complex issues and can help students reflect and move towards action.
De votre
So
participation
thank
ce
you
soir.
so much for your participation this evening. And Mary Catherine, I'll let you conclude. So I just wanted to say, everyone, say thank you to Nancy, Yolande, Dominique. Thank you for sharing so much. Both of you, it was so interesting to share the content of the game and then the experiences of Yolande and how he saw it. And I think it really gave the desire to lots of people here to have the game or to find other alternatives to the game or variants on it, to be able to use games as pedagogical tools. So I think you really did a great job of concluding our series for 2022 or 2021 to 2022 on a positive note. So thank you so much, you all in Akasi, for hosting the last workshop today. And as I wrote in the chat, you will receive an email from me between now and the weekend for all the resources, the recordings, everything that was mentioned, and you will have like ready to go your toolkit so you can bring this to your classrooms and be able to start these interesting discussions. And I also put our resource library link in the chat so you can find out our last different workshops of this series. And don't hesitate to go flip through there a little bit and contact us if there's anything. So I just want to say thank you once and again, and thank you to our interpreters. Thank you, Fanny and Danielle, who did the interpretation. They're behind the screen, but they're there, and it helps it be more accessible.